The Arizona desert always had a way of swallowing sound, especially at dusk. The sun dipped low, casting everything in a burnt orange haze as Ava Lawson finished up her last chores at the remote rescue ranch. Her hands smelled of hay, saddle soap, and the dry, spicy air that seemed to cling to everything out here. She didn't mind the isolation. At 19, Ava was old enough to feel the weight of the world, but young enough to still believe she could make a difference, one rescued animal at a time. The ranch had its rhythms. Horses, dogs, even the stubborn burro that refused to let anyone brush his mane. All fell into a gentle routine by evening. The only break in the peace came from the far-off drone of a jet engine, invisible but insistent, vibrating faintly through the air. Most of the horses barely twitched an ear. They'd grown used to the endless parade of commercial flights crossing the big, empty sky. But one didn't. Onyx, the stallion no one else wanted, stood apart near the old mesquite tree at the edge of the paddock. He was a picture of contradictions, broad-shouldered and regal, yet battered by old scars. A streak of white slicing through his black muzzle, a torn ear, a set of deep scratches on his right flank that never quite grew over with fur. No one knew how old Onyx was. Not exactly. Too old to be this wild, grumbled Tom, the ranch manager. Too much of a handful for anyone but you, said Rachel, the vet's assistant. Ava just called him her friend. She watched as Onyx lifted his head, muscles tensing, ears pricked high. His nostrils flared, the sky glowed, and the jet, maybe 40,000 feet up, was still just a speck of noise and vapor. But Onyx froze, unmoving, as if the sky itself was about to fall. Ava approached quietly, her boots stirring a small storm of dust. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, keeping her voice low and steady, the way she'd learned over endless patient months. Her fingers brushed his shoulder. He didn't startle, but his big, intelligent eyes stayed glued to the sky. He pawed the ground, hoofs scraping sharp and anxious at the hard-packed earth. In that moment, time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to just the two of them and that rumbling sound from above. She felt his tension, like electricity coiled beneath his skin. Onyx was different from the other horses. The staff all said he was jumpy, too wild, broken. People wrote him off as unfixable, but Ava saw something else, an alertness, a constant readiness, like he was always listening for a warning only he could hear. Behind her, the rest of the ranch carried on. The old barn cats prowled for scraps, goats jostled for position near the fence, and the dogs began their evening bark and sniff patrol. But Ava's focus was only on Onyx. She spoke again, her voice little more than a whisper. "Easy, big guy. I'm right here." He flicked an ear toward her, but never looked away from the horizon. The memory of the first day she met him flickered through her mind. Onyx had arrived after a wildfire tore through a neighboring county, orphaning or scattering dozens of horses. Most of the newcomers huddled together, trembling at every bang or crash. Onyx had been different. Even then, he'd stood apart, watching. It took weeks before he let anyone near, but Ava never rushed him. She knew what it was to feel like the world was always just a step away from disaster. Suddenly, the jet overhead dipped, sending a new wave of sound rolling across the landscape. Onyx shivered and let out a low, rumbling snort. Ava pressed a hand to his neck, feeling the powerful beat of his heart beneath her palm. "It's okay," she said again, more for herself than him. He calmed, but only slightly, and she knew this was more than just fear. Later, as she made her way back toward the barn, she caught Tom shaking his head as he watched her from the porch. "That one's never gonna settle, you know," he called, voice rough with years of dust and desert. "He's trouble." Ava just shrugged, wiping sweat from her brow. "He's not nervous, Tom. He's alert. There's a difference." Tom snorted. "You just be careful. We got enough drama around here." But Ava believed in listening, especially to those everyone else ignored. As the sky darkened, she checked Onyx's water one more time, lingering a little longer at his side. The night felt heavy, full of invisible currents, As the last light faded, a faint rustling came from the north end of the property. Onyx's head snapped around, ears straining. Ava paused, senses sharpening. Out here, animals always knew first, whether it was a coyote stalking the chicken coop or a dust storm about to roll in. But tonight, she felt something colder beneath her skin. In the distance, another jet approached, this one lower and much louder. Onyx braced himself, his body language changing from tense to something like warning. He shifted his weight, almost as if preparing to bolt. Ava stayed by his side, her instincts kicking in. The feeling of unease grew, and for a moment she wondered if Onyx was trying to tell her something more. A secret language of hoofbeats, flared nostrils, and trembling muscles. She closed her eyes, listening with him, letting the strange silence between jets fill her with a resolve she couldn't quite explain. She knew, deep down, that trusting Onyx wasn't just about rescuing a horse. It was about believing that sometimes the quiet ones really did see danger no one else could. And as darkness settled, the stage was set for something that would test both of them in ways no one could imagine. Ava remembered the first time she saw Onyx as if it were a memory branded into her bones. The news of the wildfire had swept through the Arizona Valley like a cruel rumor. That day, the sky was choked with ash, turning the sun into a pale disk behind a curtain of smoke. The phone at the ranch rang nonstop. Animal control officers, desperate farmers, and volunteers all scrambling to relocate horses, goats, and dogs fleeing the chaos. When the battered trailer rolled up to the Lawson Rescue Ranch, Ava and Rachel were waiting. Tom supervised from the porch, arms folded, his face creased with worry lines deeper than the Grand Canyon. The driver, a woman whose jacket still smelled faintly of smoke, swung open the trailer door and let out a sigh that said more than words could. "He's in the back," she warned. "It didn't want to load, didn't want to come. He's mean as a rattler." Ava stepped closer and peered inside. At the far end, shadowed and looming, was the black stallion. He was a silhouette at first, just a hulk of muscle and tangled mane, but as the dust settled, Ava saw the white slash on his muzzle, the notched ear, and the burn scars running down his flank, twisted and pink against his midnight coat. The other horses shifted nervously, giving him as much space as the cramped trailer allowed. Rachel frowned, whispering, "Is that a wild Mustang?" "No. He had a brand once," Ava replied, noticing the faint, broken outline on Onyx's left shoulder. "Somebody owned him, then gave up. It took 3 tries to coax him out. Most horses, panicked by fire, trembled at loud noises, but Onyx was different. When a distant siren howled, he didn't shy away. He turned toward it, nostrils flaring as if daring the world to come closer. It was only when Ava approached, moving slowly, that he relaxed the slightest bit. She spoke softly, barely more than a breath. Hey there, big fella. No more running tonight." Onyx met her eyes with an intensity that made her heart thud. There was no fear, only a deep, wary intelligence. She lifted her hand, palm open, and after a long, taut moment, he nudged her fingers with his nose. Tom shook his head. "You'll never break that one. Wildfire did something to him. He's trouble." But Ava disagreed. She believed trauma didn't make a horse dangerous. People did. The ranch was full of animals others called broken, dogs with bitten ears, a mule with a limp, a mare who spooked at her own shadow. Ava found herself drawn to the silent, the watchful, the ones who never quite fit in. Onyx was all those things and more. Over the next few weeks, Onyx proved a challenge for everyone. The staff gave him a wide berth. He shied away from the noise of tractors, thrashed if anyone tried to corner him, and bucked at even the hint of a raised voice. But he never hurt anyone. He just watched, waited, and kept his distance. At night, he'd stand apart in the moonlight, ears twitching, eyes searching the horizon for threats only he could sense. Ava's patience became a ritual. Every day after chores, she'd sit on the fence and simply exist near Onyx. She never reached for him, never pushed. She let him get used to her smell, her presence, the sound of her reading aloud from her worn paperback mysteries. Sometimes she'd hum quietly, old songs her mother used to sing before cancer took her away. Onyx would inch closer, drawn by her calmness, until one day he let her brush the tangles from his mane. Other staff members were baffled. "How do you get him to trust you?" Rachel asked, watching as Onyx stood quietly, while Ava adjusted his halter. Ava smiled. "He's not nervous. He's alert. There's a difference. He just needs to know you're not a threat." Rachel shook her head, but with a grudging respect. "Maybe you were a horse in another life." Trust, Ava realized, was a kind of silent conversation. It was in the way Onyx responded to her breathing, the subtle shift of his weight, when she changed posture, the way he came when she called, but only if she used a gentle tone. She stopped thinking of him as broken and started thinking of him as a partner, someone who listened in ways most people never would. But not everyone agreed. Tom grew impatient with the time and resources Onyx demanded. "We got 15 other horses needing care," he grumbled one evening, leaning on the corral fence. "If you don't settle down, I'm going to have to call animal control. We can't keep a dangerous animal here, Ava." Ava squared her shoulders, fire in her eyes. "He's not dangerous. He just needs someone who understands him. I'm willing to put in the hours. I'll work extra shifts." Tom shook his head, but didn't argue. In truth, the ranch needed every hand it could get. One afternoon, a sudden thunderstorm rolled in. Thunder cracked, and most horses stampeded for shelter, whinnying and tossing their heads. Onyx stood out in the open, ears back, body taut. Ava found him as the rain started to fall, drops hissing on the hot earth. "Easy, boy," she called, not moving closer. "It's just noise. You're safe here." Onyx stood perfectly still, letting the rain wash over him, eyes meeting hers. It felt like a test, and Ava refused to look away. They stood there for minutes, connected by something more powerful than words or fear. After that day, Onyx's world became smaller and safer. He let Ava lead him to water, trusted her enough to accept grain from her hand, and even started responding to her soft whistles, but he was still a riddle to everyone else. If Rachel or Tom tried to approach, he'd pin his ears and sidestep away. There was one night that changed everything. The wind howled outside, rattling the tin roof. Ava was cleaning the tack room when she heard a crash and a panicked cry. Rushing out, she found Onyx caught in a loose fence wire, thrashing wildly. Without thinking, Ava darted forward, ignoring Tom's warning shouts. She spoke in low, urgent tones, hands steady even as her heart pounded. "Easy, boy. I'm here. I'm right here." Onyx stopped, eyes rolling, but didn't kick as she untangled his leg. The next morning, Tom pulled Ava aside. "I don't know what you did, kid, but that horse would walk through fire for you." Ava looked over at Onyx, who was watching her from the corral, his gaze steady and unafraid. She smiled softly. Maybe he already has. From that moment, Ava and Onyx became inseparable, a girl and a stallion, both marked by the world's scars but bound by a trust that nothing could break. And though no one else saw it yet, their quiet partnership was about to be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined. Night fell in the Arizona desert with a suddenness that always surprised Ava, as if the land itself exhaled and turned all color into shadow. The rescue ranch had settled into its quiet routine, horses nuzzling for one last flake of hay, the barn cats disappearing into secret places, and Rachel's old pickup bumping out onto the highway in a trail of soft dust. Ava finished the last of her checks, noting Onyx standing sentry at the edge of the paddock. He'd seemed more restless than usual since the thunderstorm, a tension that made him seem twice his size in the moonlight. Ava locked the tack room and was about to head for her cabin when she heard a metallic clank behind her. She turned, expecting to see the wind playing tricks with a gate, but found Onyx standing just outside the paddock, his black coat glinting silver under the moon. He pawed at the ground and gave a low, guttural nicker. Eyes wide and alert, Ava's stomach knotted. It wasn't a sound she'd ever heard from him before. She approached, voice gentle. "What's going on, boy?" Couldn't sleep either. But Onyx was different tonight. He took a step forward, then another, his movements sharp or urgent. To Ava's shock, he grabbed the hem of her jacket in his teeth, tugging hard enough to nearly pull her off her feet. She stumbled, half laughing, half alarmed. "Whoa, easy. What's gotten into you?" But Onyx wouldn't let go. His eyes burned with a wild intelligence, and the message was clear. "Follow me." Ava glanced back at the darkened ranch house. Tom would kill her if he knew she was wandering the property alone this late. But she couldn't ignore the stallion's insistence. Grabbing a lead rope, she clipped it to his halter, though she sensed Onyx would have dragged her with or without it. As they made their way across the field, Onyx moved with purpose, pausing only to check that she was still close behind. He led her through the old gate, down a narrow trail that wound between boulders and twisted mesquite trees. The desert at night was a different world, alive with chirring insects, the occasional rustle of a night lizard, and far off, the lonely howl of a coyote. Every sense felt heightened, her skin prickling with anticipation. Onyx stopped now and then, ears flicking, nostrils flaring, before pulling her forward again. Ava's mind raced. Was there a mountain lion nearby? Had Onyx scented a rattlesnake? But no, this was something else. He led her deeper into the scrub, their path lit only by the cold glow of the moon and the faint beam of Ava's phone flashlight. Finally, they reached the edge of the property. Beyond the fence line, the desert stretched out toward the dark lump of the old airport, abandoned for years except for the occasional maintenance crew or a late-night private flight. Ava hesitated. "Onyx, what are you—" But he was already ducking beneath the loose fence wire, motioning for her to follow. Heart-pounding, she mounted him bareback, feeling the raw energy coiled beneath his skin. They crossed the open ground quickly, hoofbeats muffled by sand and wild grass. As they drew closer to the airport, Ava saw a strange sight. Headlights glinting off the side of an ancient hangar. Shadows flickering as men moved hurriedly around a small private jet parked by the runway. The scene didn't fit the sleepy rhythms of the desert night. Onyx slowed, ears pinned forward, body tense as a bowstring. Ava slid off his back and crept closer, crouching behind a tumbleweed and squinting to make sense of the figures. There were 3 of them, dressed in dark clothing, their movements sharp and hurried. They rolled large, unmarked crates out from the hangar and onto a ramp leading to the jet's open cargo hold. One man gestured angrily, waving a flashlight at the others, his voice muffled but urgent. Ava pulled out her phone and began filming, hands trembling. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't routine. The ranch was only a few miles from the airport, but she'd never seen night activity like this. Her mind cycled through possibilities. Smuggling, theft? Something worse? Then, just as one of the men passed beneath the jet's wing, a glint of metal tumbled from his pocket and landed with a soft thud in the dirt. Ava zoomed in. The object was small, black, bristling with a short antenna, a remote detonator, just like the ones she'd seen on TV news reports after bomb threats. For a split second, nobody noticed. Then the man saw it, snatched it up, and cast a frantic look around. Ava's heart hammered in her chest. She barely noticed Onyx's breath at her shoulder, steady and watchful. She knew she should call someone, Tom, the police, anyone. But her mind was blank with fear and adrenaline. She edged backward, but the ground betrayed her. A branch snapped beneath her boot, and in the sudden silence it sounded as loud as a gunshot. The men froze, heads whipping toward the sound. Ava ducked, holding her breath. Onyx remained perfectly still, his body half shadow, half solid, the desert wind ruffling his mane. The men barked at each other in sharp, guttural whispers. Then one stalked toward the brush where Ava hid. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. If she ran, she'd lead them straight to the ranch. If she stayed, she risked being caught. She trusted Onyx. He had brought her here for a reason. He pressed his nose gently against her back, then with a sudden snort, exploded out from the brush, charging past the startled man with a display of furious, wild energy. The men shouted, distracted by the sudden appearance of a raging black stallion in the moonlight. Ava took her chance, scrambling away through the shadows, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would burst. She circled wide, putting distance between herself and the hangar before finally stumbling to a stop near the maintenance shed. She leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. Onyx appeared moments later, moving quietly, as if he knew just how to blend with the night. Ava hugged him fiercely, whispering, "You saved me, boy. You really did." She peered back toward the hangar. The men, still unnerved, were loading the last of the crates. The jet's engines began to whine, a low, rising growl. Ava's mind raced. She needed to alert someone about the detonator, about everything she'd seen. She had no proof, just a shaky video and the pounding of her heart. But Onyx, steady and calm, nudged her gently toward the ranch, reminding her that sometimes listening to a horse could mean the difference between disaster and survival. By the time she and Onyx slipped back onto ranch property, dawn was just beginning to warm the horizon. Ava knew that the events of the night would change everything, for her, for Onyx, and perhaps for people she'd never even meet. And in that quiet hour before sunrise, she realized she'd never trust her instincts or her horse less than she did right now. By the time the first pale streaks of dawn washed over the Arizona sky, Ava felt like she'd aged a decade in just a few hours. She kept glancing over her shoulder as she and Onyx crept back to the ranch, the secrets of the night still alive in her chest. She barely slept, mind swirling with images of the men at the hangar, the remote detonator glinting in the dirt, and the jet's engines coming to life. Even Onyx seemed restless, pacing the length of the paddock as if the adrenaline hadn't yet left his body. As soon as the ranch staff stirred, Ava knew she had to make a choice. Stay silent and hope it was nothing, or risk everything by speaking up. She wasn't someone who liked the spotlight, and the idea of calling the police with a wild story about secret crates and detonators was enough to make her palms sweat. But every time she hesitated, Onyx would fix her with those sharp, knowing eyes, as if urging her to trust both him and herself. After breakfast, she caught Tom by the barn, his usual gruffness softened by sleep. "Tom, can I talk to you for a second?" Her voice was steadier than she felt. He looked her over, eyebrow raised. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Everything all right?" She hesitated, swallowing. "Last night, Onyx, he led me out by the old airport. There were guys loading unmarked crates into a private jet. I saw one drop something. It looked like a detonator. I think they were planning a bomb, Tom." Tom's face went from puzzled to incredulous in seconds. "Ava, do you hear yourself? This sounds like something from a TV show. You sure you weren't just spooked by coyotes?" "I know what I saw," she insisted, heat rising in her cheeks. "And I got some of it on my phone. Please, Tom, we have to tell someone." He chewed it over, uncertainty clouding his face. "All right, let's call airport maintenance. Better safe than sorry." Tom dialed the number, and Ava listened as he explained the situation in cautious, measured words, leaving out the parts about Onyx's sixth sense. The man on the other end sounded skeptical, but promised to send a guy to check it out. Ava spent the next hour pacing the ranch, barely able to think straight. What if she was wrong? What if they thought she was crazy? Onyx, always attuned to her moods, watched her quietly, occasionally nickering as if to say, "You did the right thing." But as the sun climbed higher, everything changed. Suddenly, a distant alarm wailed from the direction of the airport, the sound thin and urgent in the morning air. Minutes later, sirens joined the chorus. Local police, the fire department, and, in an ominous escalation, the deep roar of a bomb squad truck barreling down the access road. Rachel, rushing out of the barn, caught Ava's arm. "What's happening?" I think they found something," Ava said, voice barely above a whisper. The next few hours unfolded in a blur. The ranch's phone rang off the hook. airport security, law enforcement, even a pair of federal agents. They wanted details, specifics. Ava repeated her story so many times it felt like the truth might fray at the edges. But each time she reached the part about Onyx, she hesitated. How could she explain that it was the horse who first sensed the danger, who led her to the scene in the dead of night? At the airport, chaos reigned. The bomb squad moved with quick, precise efficiency, combing every inch of the hangar and jet. Finally, word came they'd found a timed explosive device wedged beneath the fuel tank of the jet, one scheduled to carry a handful of state senators to a conference later that morning. The news spread fast, leaking from official lips to local reporters, then exploding across social media. Bomb threat at Mesa Airfield foiled. Back at the ranch, Ava felt a dizzying mixture of relief, exhaustion, and dread. It was real. She hadn't imagined it. But now, her name, and by extension the ranch, was suddenly on everyone's lips. A pair of uniformed officers arrived at the ranch gate, their cruiser stirring up a rooster tail of red dust. Tom greeted them, hands jammed deep in his pockets. Ava stood nearby, feeling the weight of every nervous glance from the other staff. The older of the two officers, a woman with a badge that read SGT, Lopez, approached. "You're Ava Lawson?" "Yes, ma'am." "We'd like to ask you some questions." "Your report was specific and accurate. How did you know something was wrong out there?" Ava glanced at Onyx, who stood just behind her, mane tousled by the wind. It's going to sound strange, but Onyx, my horse, he's the one who noticed something was off. He pulled me out there last night. If it wasn't for him, I never would have seen what I saw." Lopez regarded her with a look that was half skepticism, half curiosity. "You're saying the horse found the bomb?" Ava nodded, embarrassment rising. "I know it sounds crazy, but he was alert. Like he could sense something none of us could. I trust him." There was a pause, and then the younger officer, a sandy-haired man with a tired smile, chuckled. "Hey, we've seen dogs save lives. Why not a horse?" Lopez nodded. "Either way, you did the right thing. The authorities want to thank you. There's going to be a lot of press and probably some questions you won't like. Just tell the truth, Ava, and take care of that horse." After they left, the ranch was abuzz with speculation. Some of the staff looked at Onyx with new respect, while others simply shook their heads, unable to reconcile the jumpy, wild stallion with the idea of a hero. Rachel found Ava in the tack room, sitting cross-legged on a pile of saddle blankets, head in her hands. She sat down beside her. "You did good, Ava. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. That horse is special. You both are." Ava managed a tired smile. I hope this is over. I hope it was just a one-time thing." But even as she said it, Onyx lingered by the fence, eyes fixed on the far-off runway. He pawed the ground, muscles tense, as if waiting for something she couldn't yet see. Late that night, after the ranch finally settled, Ava returned to the paddock. She stood with Onyx beneath the desert stars, running her fingers through his tangled mane. "I didn't find it. You did," she whispered. "They can call me brave all they want, but you're the one who saved lives today." Onyx nuzzled her shoulder, his breath warm and steady. For a moment, the fear and chaos of the day faded, replaced by a quiet certainty. Their story was just beginning, and whatever came next, she would trust his instincts, no matter what anyone else believed. And out on the silent desert airstrip, the wind carried the unspoken warning of more dangers to come, waiting in the shadows. The desert mornings at the Lawson Rescue Ranch usually promised a kind of peace. Birds flashing through their rising heat, horses tossing their heads, and sunlight rolling over the red-dusted hills. But the morning after the bomb scare, the whole place felt different, charged with nervous energy. Everyone moved a little faster, eyes darting to the highway or the distant airport, as if trouble might come riding back on the wind. Ava barely slept. Headlines splashed across her phone. Local woman foils airport bombing, and her name trended for a few wild hours. But the details never felt real. Not after what she'd lived through. She had a stack of voicemails from reporters and even a call from her estranged father. "Proud of you, kid, but stay safe." That left her heart sore and unsettled. She pushed it all aside as she walked to the paddock at sunrise, determined to keep her focus on the horses. Onyx was waiting for her by the gate, nostrils flaring, eyes sharp and restless. For the first time since the night at the hangar, he seemed uneasy. As Ava latched the gate behind her, she noticed the stallion's ears were pricked toward the east, toward the distant outline of the airport. He kept shifting his weight from hoof to hoof, tail swishing in agitation. She ran her hand down his neck. "It's okay, big guy. You did good. It's over now." But even as she said it, she didn't quite believe it herself. Rachel came out with a coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other, trying to act casual. "You all right, Ava?" "Whole world's been looking for you. Didn't expect to see a hero mucking stalls today." Ava rolled her eyes, but smiled, grateful for the attempt at normalcy. "Can't let Tom fire me for slacking off even if I'm famous for a minute." Rachel grinned, but her eyes flicked to Onyx, still pacing. "Is he always like that?" Ava shook her head. "No, this is new. It's like he's waiting for something." That something didn't take long to reveal itself. By mid-morning, airport security called the ranch. Official, but strained. "We're conducting a sweep, just in case," the man said. "But honestly, Miss Lawson, your story's making some people nervous. We have a senator's team here. Do you mind coming down for a statement?" Ava agreed, despite the twisting in her stomach. She let Tom know she'd be away for a few hours. As she saddled Onyx for a ride around the property before leaving, the stallion suddenly jerked away, dragging her across the paddock. He fixed his gaze toward the airport, ears flat, muscles coiled tight. "Hey! Settle down, boy," she called, struggling to keep her grip. Onyx ignored her. He let out a sharp, urgent whinny and started pacing along the fence line, his head swinging toward the road that cut across the ranch's back acreage. The same road airport maintenance and delivery trucks sometimes used. Ava caught her breath and stared after him, a sinking dread tightening her chest. Rachel jogged over, concern etched on her face. "Is he spooked by all the sirens? Or is there something out there?" Ava hesitated, torn between embarrassment and instinct. She watched as Onyx trotted the length of the fence, then stopped dead, nostrils flaring toward the breeze. Somewhere out by the tarmac, she heard the faint beep, beep, beep of a reversing vehicle. "He's trying to tell us something," Ava said, more to herself than to Rachel. "Just like last time." She sprinted for the ranch house, heart pounding, and grabbed her phone. She called the airport's security office, getting patched through after too many rings. "This is Ava Lawson from Lawson Rescue Ranch. I know this sounds crazy, but I think there's another threat near the airport, by the utility vehicles, maybe the tarmac." There was a pause. Then the gruff voice on the line replied, "You think your horse can smell bombs or something, Miss Lawson?" Ava bristled, but she didn't back down. "No, he's just, he's never wrong about danger. Please, just check." The silence on the other end stretched, and then the man sighed. "We'll send a guy to look, but if this is some kind of prank, it's not," Ava snapped, then hung up before she could talk herself out of it. Back at the paddock, Onyx was still wound tight, pawing at the ground, sweat glistening on his dark coat despite the coolness of the morning. Rachel approached quietly, handing Ava a bottle of water. "You all right?" "Yeah," Ava said, voice shaking. "I just need someone to believe me. Or at least believe in him." Half an hour passed. Ava's nerves felt stretched to breaking. Then her phone rang. A different number, one she didn't recognize. "Miss Lawson? This is Officer Dean from Airport Security. We found something. An explosive device, wired to the main fuse box on a utility truck near the tarmac. It was set on a timer, just like the other one. Thank you. Again." Ava went numb. She slumped against the fence, the weight of it all pressing down. Rachel stared at her in disbelief. You did it again. Or, I mean, he did. Tom, who'd been watching from a distance, stomped over, grumbling. What the hell, Ava? That horse got superpowers or something. Ava just shook her head, tears springing to her eyes. He's not a superhero. He just listens, really listens. That's all. But word spread quickly. Some of the ranch hands started to look at Onyx like he was something otherworldly, a living legend. Others still scoffed, muttering about dumb luck or good timing. When Ava tried to explain that it was just instinct and connection, not magic, nobody really listened. By noon, reporters had started calling again, and a local TV crew showed up at the ranch. Ava did her best to answer questions without sensationalizing Onyx's role, but the story had already taken on a life of its own. She caught the mechanic from airport maintenance on the news, smirking as he described the scene. What is he? A bomb-sniffing stallion now? Maybe we should get him a badge. Ava ignored the sarcasm. Deep down, she knew that Onyx's gift wasn't about tricks or training. It was about trust. He'd saved lives, twice because she'd chosen to listen, even when it made her look foolish. Late that night, as the desert cooled and the world seemed to settle, Ava found herself alone in the paddock again, Onyx resting his heavy head on her shoulder. The stars above seemed impossibly bright, silent witnesses to all they'd been through. You did it, boy, she whispered, stroking his tangled mane. And no matter what anyone says, we did it. Onyx shifted, nudging her with a gentle insistence that felt almost like pride. And as Ava gazed into the endless night, she understood that the bond between them was something rare. A quiet, wordless strength in a world that too often ignored the whispers of instinct. But deep down, she also knew this wasn't over. The danger wasn't gone. Onyx was still uneasy, still alert, as if he sensed that the darkest test was yet to come. The Arizona sun was high and relentless by the time the investigation at the airport reached a fever pitch. The bomb squad, police, and security officers swarmed the tarmac, yellow tape fluttering in the breeze as reporters jostled for statements from grim-faced officials. Word of a second bomb, the second foiled by a horse no less, had set the entire region on edge. For Ava, it felt like the world was spinning too fast, like each new headline and each new stranger's stare was another weight she couldn't shake off. But Onyx wasn't interested in headlines. He paced and snorted restlessly near the back fence of the ranch, muscles trembling with a tension that Ava had learned to recognize as pure instinct. As the commotion at the airport escalated, Ava found herself drifting closer to him, as if just being near the stallion could help her steady her nerves. She didn't realize how tense the situation was until she heard the sirens. Different this time. Urgent and escalating, followed by a commotion near the airport gate. Ava squinted across the shimmering heat waves. At first, she saw nothing but the outline of security vehicles. Then she caught a glimpse of a dark van barreling away from the investigation site, kicking up a rooster tail of dust as it raced down the access road. But a knot of dread twisted in Ava's gut. She recognized the van. She'd seen it at the hangar, the night Onyx had pulled her into the shadows. It was the same battered vehicle the men had used to unload the mysterious crates. Before she could think, she heard Tom's voice, sharp and panicked, cut through the rising chaos. Someone's making a run for it. Ava froze for a split second, then spun to Onyx, who was already keyed up, eyes glued to the retreating van. His whole body seemed to vibrate with purpose. You want to go after them, don't you? She whispered, barely aware of the people gathering behind her. She didn't wait for permission. In one fluid motion, she grabbed Onyx's halter, swung herself up onto his bare back, no time for a saddle, and pressed her heels gently into his sides. Let's go, she called, and he responded as if he'd been waiting for the cue all along. They shot us through the ranch gate, the sudden thunder of Onyx's hooves startling a flock of birds into the air. The van, now careening wildly down the dusty trail that bordered the ranch, was trying to escape before the police could organize a proper pursuit. Ava clung low to Onyx's neck, feeling every powerful surge of his muscles as they tore across the rough ground. The chase was on. The van zigzagged around a cluster of boulders, skidding dangerously on loose gravel. Ava shouted as she spotted a figure, one of the suspects, leaning out the window, frantically scanning for a clear route through the thorny brush. The path ahead was narrow, flanked by gnarled mesquite and patches of spiny cactus. The van's driver didn't hesitate, swerving through the vegetation, sending dust and debris swirling in the air. Ava leaned forward, whispering encouragement to Onyx. "You got this, boy!" "Faster!" The stallion responded with a fresh burst of speed, his hooves kicking up little clouds of red sand. She felt the wind burn her cheeks, the rush of adrenaline making her vision narrow until all she could see was the van, Onyx, and the wild openness of the desert. The chase took them over uneven ground, old dry creek beds, rocky outcrops, and clusters of wildflowers bending in the wind. Ava's mind raced, every sense heightened. She knew that if the van reached the highway, the suspects would be gone. The police were just far enough behind that it might be too late. As the crested a small rise, Ava saw that the van was losing control, the driver struggling to keep it straight. Onyx, reading the terrain as only a horse could, veered off the main path, cutting across a rocky slope that would let them intercept the van at the bottom of a shallow ravine. It was risky, but Ava trusted him completely. "Hang on, boy, just a little more," she called. Down the slope they thundered, the whirl a blur of dust and sunlight. At the bottom, the van hit a patch of soft sand and slowed, just enough for Onyx to close the distance. Ava heard the engine straining, the tires spinning uselessly as the vehicle fishtailed and threatened to tip. The suspects inside panicked. One of them threw open the side door and tried to leap out, stumbling in the sand. Ava yelled, hoping to warn the authorities, but her voice was lost in the roar of the chase. Onyx, driven by some deep, uncanny sense, it darted in front of the van just as it tried to lurch forward again. The driver swerved hard to avoid the stallion, the front wheels plunging into a deeper drift of sand. With a sickening crunch, the van tipped, landing on its side in a cloud of grit. For a moment, everything went still. Then, chaos erupted. Police vehicles roaring up, officers jumping out with weapons drawn, shouting commands. Ava slid off Onyx, her legs trembling as she tried to catch her breath. She could taste the dust, feel her heart hammering against her ribs. The suspects were quickly surrounded and dragged out of the van, hands zip-tied behind their backs. Ava watched, relief and exhaustion flooding her all at once. Tom arrived on the scene, jaw hanging open. How the hell did you—" Ava didn't answer. She was still focused on Onyx, who stood tall and unflinching, his body streaked with sweat but his eyes bright with a strange, almost triumphant calm. A police officer hurried over. "Miss Lawson, are you all right? That was incredible. You just stopped a getaway in progress." Ava could barely nod, still processing the speed of it all. "It wasn't just me," she managed, stroking Onyx's neck. "He knew where to go. He always does." "Oh," the officer shook his head in disbelief, then called over his shoulder for paramedics to check the suspects and for backup to secure the crash scene. Ava and Onyx became the center of attention again, though this time the admiration in the officer's eyes felt different, respectful, almost reverent. "We're not done," Ava whispered, voice hoarse, as she pressed her forehead to Onyx's mane. The feeling was still there, a strange electric sense that this was only the middle of the story. Reporters soon arrived, cameras flashing. Ava ducked away, letting Tom and the police handle the questions, but not before she was asked, again, how she knew to follow the van. How a horse could possibly anticipate a criminal's next move. She just shrugged, giving Onyx all the credit. As dusk settled, Ava walked Onyx back toward the ranch, the adrenaline finally giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. They'd stopped a desperate escape, but Ava could feel a new tension rippling through the air. There was more to come. She could sense it, just as Onyx always seemed to. And as the stars crept out over the desert, Ava knew one thing for sure. Whatever the future held, she and Onyx were in it together, ready to face the darkness side by side. The news vans started arriving before sunrise. At first, it was just a couple of dusty local reporters standing by the highway, with notepads, eager for the scoop on the bomb-sniffing stallion. But by noon, the gravel road leading to the Lawson Rescue Ranch was lined with satellite trucks. Their dishes pointed skyward as anchors rehearsed dramatic intros about the Arizona horse who saved senators' lives. Drone cameras buzzed overhead, capturing wide shots of the desert, the barn, and, most of all, Onyx, who watched the commotion from his paddock with quiet dignity. Ava woke up to her phone, vibrating with messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Journalists, politicians, strangers from across the country. Her inbox was overflowing with interview requests, media offers, even invitations to appear on national morning shows. Her nerves jangled with every ping, but her priority was always the same. Check on Onyx. She slipped out to the paddock before the first cameraman could catch her. The morning air was cool, the sky still streaked with dawn. Onyx was already at the fence, ears flicking at the strange sounds, but calm beneath her hand. Ava stroked his neck and whispered, "You're famous now, buddy. I hope you're ready for it." He nudged her shoulder with his muzzle, searching her face for reassurance. The world might see a hero, but to Onyx, she was still just the girl who brought him apples and trusted his instincts. Ava stayed by his side as the ranch began to stir, staff whispering about producers from cable news and rumors that a senator might visit in person. After breakfast, Rachel poked her head out of the house. Phone pressed to her ear. "Ava, you're wanted on Channel 5 in 10 minutes, and there's some billionaire guy named Kensington asking for you." Should I tell him to wait? Ava blinked. "Graham Kensington, as in the jet owner?" Rachel's eyebrows shot up. "The same. He says he's flying in today. Something about wanting to meet his horse's hero?" Ava's heart pounded. She'd seen the man on TV, a silver-haired mogul with a reputation for hard-nosed business and lavish philanthropy. Suddenly, this was more than just a local story. It was national, maybe even global. As the morning stretched on, Ava found herself fielding interviews from reporters jostling by the fence. They all asked the same questions. How did you know there was danger? What makes Onyx different? Do you think animals can sense what humans can't? Ava tried her best to stay humble, repeating, "I just listen to my horse. Sometimes you have to trust the ones who see the world differently." But the more she said it, the less people seemed to really hear her words. They wanted a story, not an explanation. The first visit from the authorities was soon followed by politicians in crisp suits, eager to shake her hand and get a photo with Onyx. One of the senators whose life had been saved gave her a stiff hug in front of the cameras, whispering, "You did the right thing, Miss Lawson." Then he turned to the press with a gleaming smile, using her story to launch into a speech about security, vigilance, and the American spirit. Ava stood awkwardly to the side, feeling both proud and deeply uncomfortable. She watched Onyx handle the attention better than she did, standing still for photographers, ears up and eyes steady, the scars on his coat now marks of resilience rather than shame. Then, in the late afternoon, a sleek black limousine rolled up the drive. Out stepped Graham Kensington, flanked by a small team of assistants and security. He was taller in person, tanned, and immaculately dressed in a linen suit that looked out of place in the Arizona dust. His handshake was firm, his gaze piercing. "Miss Lawson," he said, his voice deep and smooth, "I want to thank you, personally, for what you and your horse have done. If not for your instincts and his, my plane and its passengers would have been lost. I owe you both a debt." Ava stammered, not used to such formality. "Sir, I just did what anyone would do. It was Onyx. He saw it first." Kensington smiled, eyes glinting. "That's what makes this so remarkable. I've seen animal intuition at work, but never like this. I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you. I run a foundation dedicated to animal-assisted security and therapy. With your permission, I'd like to invite Onyx to join a new initiative at my estate. He'd be part of a pioneering program, using animals' instincts to protect, serve, and heal." Ava felt her throat tighten. The idea of Onyx leaving the ranch filled her with both hope and sadness. You want to take him away? Not forever, Kensington reassured. You'd have visiting rights. He'd be cared for, studied, and celebrated. This program could change the way we think about animal intelligence. And you'd be at the heart of it. Rachel gave Ava a look that said, "Are you seriously thinking about saying no to this?" Ava promised to consider it, but the rest of the day passed in a haze. News crews stayed late into the evening, filming Onyx as the sunset burned orange behind the paddock. Kensington's assistants presented her with documents, proposals, and a scholarship offer if she wanted to study animal behavior, or even pursue veterinary school. As the desert night finally pushed the last camera crew away, Ava slipped out to the paddock. Onyx was grazing peacefully, unfazed by his newfound fame. She knelt beside him, her hand resting on his withers, and whispered, "What do you think, boy? Are you meant for bigger things?" He lifted his head and looked out across the endless dark, as if already listening for the next danger, the next call. Inside, her phone kept buzzing, but for a moment, Ava let herself just be present with the horse who had changed everything. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, fame, scrutiny, or another test, but she knew she'd face it with Onyx, wherever their journey led next. As she walked back to the ranch house, the stars burning overhead, Ava couldn't help but wonder, had she found Onyx, or had he found her? Either way, their story was no longer just their own. The world was watching, and the legacy of a horse who listened harder than anyone else was only beginning. The morning of Onyx's departure arrived far too soon. Even with all the excitement, media buzz, and new opportunities swirling around her, Ava felt the weight of the decision settle deep in her bones. It was impossible to ignore. Everywhere she turned, there were reminders that life at the ranch was about to change forever. The sun crested the horizon with a soft gold light that painted the desert in gentle hues as if the land itself wanted to ease her pain. Ava woke before dawn, unable to sleep, and wandered outside to where Onyx waited in the quiet paddock. The ranch felt different, emptier, almost expectant. The horses, dogs, and even the birds seemed to move more slowly, their routines subdued in the hush of anticipation. Ava carried a bucket of oats, but Onyx barely glanced at the treat. His attention was elsewhere, eyes turned toward the distant line of the highway, as if he knew today's significance. For a while, Ava just stood by his side, her fingers running through the wild tangles of his mane, not needing to say anything at all. She thought about all the mornings she'd greeted him here, back before anyone cared about their story. How many times had she stood by this fence, whispering secrets? Only he seemed to understand. How many storms, quiet evenings, and silent moments had shaped the unspoken trust between them. This was the place where she'd first realized that sometimes the quietest creatures saw the most. When Rachel appeared with a thermos of coffee and a sad smile, Ava managed a grateful nod. They watched the sun rise together, Onyx shifting between them, his presence grounding and strong. "You're doing the right thing," Rachel said gently. "He's special. People need to see that." Ava wiped her eyes, embarrassed by the emotion. "I know. It's just, I never thought I'd have to say goodbye." Rachel squeezed her shoulder. "He's not gone, Ava. He's just moving forward. And so are you." The rest of the ranch woke slowly. Tom grumbled his way through chores, quieter than usual. Even the other horses seemed to sense that something important was happening. News of Onyx's upcoming transfer had already made the rounds. Some locals cheered the honor, others whispered doubts about shipping him off like a prize. Ava tried to ignore it all. Only she and Onyx knew what their connection truly meant. By mid-morning, a long horse trailer pulled up, gleaming white with Kensington's estate logo on the side. 2 handlers in pressed uniforms stepped out, moving with practiced ease. They greeted Ava politely and began to prepare Onyx for travel, their efficiency both reassuring and a little cold. Ava stayed close, murmuring encouragement as they fitted him with a soft halter and checked his vital signs. Onyx remained calm, but his ears twitched, eyes scanning the ranch as if memorizing every detail. Ava pressed her forehead to his, breathing in the familiar scent of dust and sunlight. "You're not just a hero, you know?" she whispered, voice thick. "You're my best friend." The handlers finished their checks. Rachel hugged Ava tightly. Tom, awkward but genuine, Sachet gave Onyx a scratch behind the ear and mumbled, "Bring him back in one piece, all right?" There were no speeches, no cameras, no crowd, just the quiet dignity of a horse and the girl who trusted him above all else. When the moment came to lead Onyx into the trailer, Ava walked by his side. He moved willingly, only pausing at the ramp to glance back at the ranch, the paddock, the fence where so much of their journey had begun. Ava squeezed his shoulder, fighting to keep her composure. "You were never mine to keep," she said quietly. "You're meant to protect. Wherever you go, don't forget what you've taught me." The trailer door closed with a soft finality. Ava watched as the rig pulled away, dust swirling in its wake. She stood at the edge of the property, arms folded tight across her chest, blinking hard against the sudden sting in her eyes. The hours that followed felt empty. Ava wandered through her chores in a fog, her mind replaying every memory of Onyx, his first wary nudge, the night he pulled her into the shadows, the unbreakable trust they'd built step by step. The ranch was quieter without his presence. Even the dogs seemed subdued, as if the world was holding its breath. Rachel found her in the feed room, staring out the window at the distant road. "You okay?" Ava nodded, though the ache inside her felt like a bruise that wouldn't heal. "I just hope he's happy. I hope they treat him like I would." Rachel smiled gently. "He'll always know who you are. You're part of his story, just like he's part of yours." That afternoon, Ava received a text from one of Kensington's handlers. Onyx had arrived safely at the estate. They included a photo. Onyx in a lush, spacious paddock, the rolling green hills and high-tech barns almost surreal after the dusty desert. He stood tall, head high, already surveying his new kingdom. The estate itself was nothing like the rescue ranch. Ava visited 2 days later, determined to see for herself. The grounds were immaculate, dotted with carefully maintained pastures, exercise tracks, and training facilities that gleamed in the sun. Onyx's new stable was bigger than Ava's entire cabin, with a staff of dedicated handlers, veterinarians, and trainers. When Ava found him, Onyx was standing at the far end of a wide enclosure, nose in the air, ears twitching as he watched the horizon. She called his name, and he turned instantly, breaking into a slow, proud trot. For a moment, the distance between them disappeared, and Ava laughed through her tears as he nuzzled her shoulder. They walked the estate together, Ava listening as Kensington's staff explained the security program, the therapy horses, and the scientists eager to study Onyx's instincts. Ava felt a sense of pride, but also a pang of longing. She knew she'd made the right decision. Onyx was meant to be more than a legend at one little ranch. He was here to teach the world that courage and intuition had value beyond words. As the sun began to set, painting the estate in gold and shadow, Ava knelt beside Onyx one last time. "You're not alone," she whispered. "I'll come visit, but you're needed here." Onyx lifted his head, gazing into the growing dusk, his body still and focused, always listening, always alert. Ava pressed her palm to his cheek, holding on to the connection that nothing could break. As she walked away, Onyx stood watching, a silent sentinel. She felt his presence with her, even as distance grew between them. For the first time in days, Ava felt a sense of peace, knowing their story wasn't ending, just changing shape. And back at the ranch, every time the wind rattled the old fence or the sky filled with the distant roar of a jet, Ava smiled, remembering the stallion who taught her that goodbyes are never forever, not when hearts, instincts, and memories refuse to let go. Night at Kensington Estate was nothing like the evenings at Lawson Rescue Ranch. There were no coyotes howling in the distance, no creaking windmills or dusty paddocks. Instead, the world felt orderly and engineered. Surveillance cameras blinked in the corners, high-tech motion sensors lined the walkways, and the glow from security lights washed the grounds in a constant silver blue. For all its opulence and innovation, the place never truly slept. And yet, to Onyx, the darkness held a different kind of tension. He'd been at the estate for a week, long enough to settle into the rhythms of daily exercise and training sessions and regular visits from a rotating cast of handlers and researchers. People came and went, murmuring to each other about animal intuition, the bomb horse, and untapped potential. Sometimes, Onyx longed for the gentle hand and quiet voice of Ava, whose patience had always been his anchor. But he was also proud, standing tall among the other horses, his scars worn like medals. Onyx had already shown remarkable abilities. During one demonstration, he refused to approach a suspicious box left as a decoy for a security drill, alerting the handlers to a hidden electrical fault inside. The trainers, at first skeptical, were slowly becoming believers, but there were still whispers. Doubts about whether it was all just luck or clever tricks. Onyx felt the pressure mounting, sensed the eyes watching him, even when the arena was empty. One evening, just as the estate slipped into its well-rehearsed routine, something shifted. The night was hot and heavy, a storm pressing in from the horizon. Onyx paced in his spacious stall, agitated, nostrils flaring as the air grew thick and electric. His handler for the evening, a young man named Marcus, came by to check the latches. "Easy, big guy," Marcus said, voice casual. "Lights out in 15. You're on patrol tonight." Marcus led Onyx out to the main grounds, where they walked the perimeter as part of a new security protocol. Unlike most horses, Onyx was trusted enough to join the night shift, his instincts regarded as a kind of secret weapon by Kensington's top brass. The estate's floodlights cast long shadows across the lawns and walkways, painting the world in contrasts of dark and dazzling white. At first, everything seemed routine. Onyx trotted beside Marcus, head up, listening to every snap of twigs, every shift in the wind. The other handlers chatted by the gate, unconcerned, secure in the belief that their technology would keep them safe. But Onyx felt it, a ripple of unease, subtle but persistent. He stopped suddenly, refusing to go further along the northern path. Marcus tugged gently on the lead. "Come on, boy, don't start this again," he muttered, exasperated. Onyx snorted and braced himself, eyes wide and fixed on the far side of the power control building, a squat, windowless structure housing the estate's generators and circuit breakers. Something wasn't right. A scent in the air, sharp and oily, made his skin prickle. He stamped his hoof, turning in a tight circle, then bolted forward, dragging Marcus off balance. "Whoa! Onyx! Stop!" Marcus cried, stumbling behind him, but Onyx was relentless. He barreled toward the control building, nostrils flared, heart pounding. He yanked Marcus to the door, then halted, snorting loudly, pawing at the ground with frantic urgency. Marcus, catching his breath, pulled out his flashlight and scanned the area. "What is it? There's nothing. Wait." As he shined the beam around the corner, a shadow flickered in the darkness. A figure crouched near the building's service hatch, dressed in black, moving with practiced stealth. For a moment, Marcus froze, then realized what he was seeing. "Hey," he shouted, voice cracking the stillness. The intruder jerked upright, startled, dropping a metal case. He scrambled to recover it, fumbling with wires and a small electronic device. Onyx let out a piercing whinny, rearing back on his hind legs, the sound echoing across the grounds like a siren. The alarm in his voice was unmistakable. Security guards, already on edge from recent events, came running. The saboteur tried to flee, but Onyx lunged forward, blocking his path. The would-be attacker cursed, swinging a crowbar wildly, but Onyx dodged, muscles coiled and eyes blazing. Marcus radioed for backup, breathless, as guards closed in. The intruder managed to wedge himself into the service room, slamming the door behind him. The guards hesitated, uncertain, but Onyx didn't wait. He surged forward, kicking the heavy storage door with powerful hooves. It gave way on the third blow, splintering under his weight. The guards poured in, wrestling the man to the ground and seizing the device, later identified as a timer-wired explosive intended to disable the estate's power, security, and surveillance for a coordinated break-in. When the dust settled, the estate manager came out, his face pale. He would have knocked out everything: security, lights, the alarms. We'd have been sitting ducks. How did you know? Marcus looked down at Onyx, still panting from the effort, his eyes shining with fierce intelligence. He just knew. He always does. The next morning, Kensington himself called a meeting in the main hall. The staff gathered, subdued but buzzing with rumors. At the center of the room stood Onyx, now both celebrity and savior, his presence commanding the kind of respect few humans could ever muster. Kensington addressed them all, his voice steady. Last night, disaster was averted, not by technology, not by protocol, but by the instinct and courage of an animal most of us would have underestimated. Onyx saw what our cameras couldn't. He acted without hesitation. Heroes don't always speak. Some just listen harder than the rest of us. The applause was thunderous, but Onyx only flicked an ear, ever watchful, as if waiting for the next shadow to cross his path. Ava, watching a live feed of the announcement on her phone back at the ranch, felt tears prick her eyes, not of sadness, but of pride. The world was finally seeing what she'd known all along. Sometimes salvation comes from the quietest places. Sometimes the best listeners are the ones who save us from the darkness we don't see coming. Later that night, as the estate returned to its usual calm, Onyx stood beneath the stars, muscles relaxed, eyes scanning the horizon. Somewhere far away, he knew Ava was watching the same sky, both of them connected by the thread of trust that nothing could break. And while the headlines would focus on heroes, security, and drama, those who truly understood would remember that Onyx's greatest gift was his ability to sense the danger in silence and to answer the call, no matter the cost. The world didn't go quiet after Onyx's heroics at Kensington Estate. If anything, the story grew, branching out through news cycles, social media feeds, and water cooler conversations across the country. For a few fleeting weeks, it seemed like everywhere Ava looked, someone was talking about the black stallion who heard the sky, and the young woman who had listened to a horse's warning when no one else would. But as the headlines faded, the true impact of their journey began to take root. At the ranch, Ava found herself answering letters from strangers, children who'd watched the story unfold and wanted to know more about animal instincts, nervous teens who found courage in Ava's example, and even veterans who saw Onyx's trust as a metaphor for learning to believe again. She kept every letter, and each one a reminder that something small, a whisper, a feeling, a moment of intuition, could ripple out to touch lives she'd never meet. Inspired by the response, Ava decided to tell their story herself. She poured her heart into every page of a book she titled The Horse Who Heard the Sky. She wrote late into the night, at the same kitchen table where she'd filled out college applications and written feed orders, the words coming in bursts as memory surfaced. Onyx's tense stare at the stormy horizon, the way his body vibrated with warning at the airport, the silent connection that had always been more real than anything spoken aloud. It wasn't just a book about heroism or luck. It was about listening, really listening, not just to the loudest voices, but to the quietest signs. The animal who won't settle, the uneasy feeling in your gut, the truth that hides in plain sight. Ava described her doubts, her fears, the nights she lay awake, wondering if she was crazy to trust a horse, when everyone else rolled their eyes. She wrote about failure, about how courage was often a lonely thing, and how loving someone, meant trusting even when you didn't understand. The book sold modestly at first, then caught fire when a journalist read an excerpt on national television. Suddenly, Ava was fielding invitations to schools, conferences, even security symposiums. She traveled, often reluctantly, always wishing she could be back in the saddle beside Onyx. But each time she spoke, she told the same message. Courage comes in many forms. Some have 4 legs and no voice. Instinct isn't superstition, it's survival. Never ignore the quiet ones. They're often the ones who save us. Meanwhile, life at Kensington Estate changed too. Onyx became the centerpiece of the Animal Intuition Security Program, a living legend. Trainers from across the country came to study him, hoping to understand and maybe replicate the bond he'd had with Ava. But those who spent time with him realized there was no easy explanation. It wasn't about training or tricks, it was about connection and trust. Onyx's days were filled with gentle work and quiet moments. He visited children in therapy programs, stood steady beside anxious veterans, and walked the grounds on night patrol. Ears always tuned for danger. The staff learned to read his moods, to watch for the flick of an ear or the set of his jaw that meant something wasn't right. He saved the estate from one more attempted break-in, sensing the intruder before even the cameras caught a shadow moving by the back fence. But even as his reputation grew, Onyx never lost the calm presence that had drawn Ava to him from the very beginning. He'd stand at the edge of his paddock at dusk, watching the sky, as if listening for some distant echo only he could hear. Every few weeks, Ava visited. Each reunion felt both familiar and new. A reminder that goodbyes, when spoken with love, are never final. She'd sit beside Onyx beneath the shade of an old oak, reading him passages from her book, or just resting her head against his shoulder. No cameras, no press, just two friends, shaped by trust and memory. One evening, Kensington himself approached as Ava brushed Onyx's mane. The billionaire looked different, older maybe, but also softer, more thoughtful. "You changed things here, Ava," he said quietly. "People talk about security and technology, but what you and Onyx have is something science still struggles to measure. We all need reminders that the world isn't just logic and facts. Sometimes it's feeling, the kind that can't be put in a manual." Ava smiled. "He taught me that, not the other way around." Kensington nodded, then offered her a copy of her own book, bound in leather with a dedication embossed in gold, "To those who listen harder than the rest of us." That night, the estate hosted a small ceremony. Trainers, handlers, and even a few former skeptics gathered as Kensington gave a speech by the paddock under the open sky. We honor heroes in many ways: statues, medals, stories passed down through families. But sometimes, the greatest legacy is a lesson. Tonight, we honor Onyx and Ava, not for superpowers, but for trust, for proving that sometimes you have to go quiet to hear what matters. The applause was gentle but real, echoing into the night. Ava closed her eyes and let the moment wash over her. She remembered all the doubts, all the fears, and all the tiny choices that had led to this place. Most of all, she remembered the very first night Onyx had stared at the sky, warning her of a danger, and how, by listening, she had changed both of their destinies. As the guests drifted away, Ava lingered by Onyx's side, stroking his neck as the stars blinked overhead. She whispered, "Thank you for trusting me, for showing me that instincts matter, even when nobody else believes." Onyx leaned into her touch, and together they looked up at the sky, unafraid, unbroken, and ready for whatever came next. The final message of their story lingered long after the crowd had gone. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet certainty to trust your heart and those who can't speak for themselves. And as the night deepened, Onyx stood under the stars, head high, listening, ready. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true stories where instincts defy the odds. Share this with anyone who believes that animals feel and know more than we can ever imagine.